I mean, we're the best at incarcerating our own people. We're the best at medical bankruptcy, but dog shit and maternal mortality, dog shit and infant mortality. But the ones that count, throwing people in jail, we're number one, baby.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be forgotten.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, and welcome once again to Occultae Veritatis podcast. I'm Ood Gallifrey, and in distance recording with me, I have...
Murray,
Leon Felger,
Richard Bigley.
Ironically, the soundboard demon is having problems with his sound card, and our special guest...
Hi, I go by That Dang Dad on the internet, but you can call me Phil.
He has a YouTube channel. If you type in That Dang Dad on YouTube, you'll find him right away. He has a bunch of interesting videos. Binge them all. So in case 125, I talked about police training for a couple hours. I talked about the recruitment styles, what new cops learn in the academy, what kind of things are in their manuals. I argued that the way that officers are trained in the academy leads to a lot of corruption, police brutality, anti-citizen attitudes, and bigotry. But there was a part of the story that I didn't really cover because it's really hard to research. What happens after the academy? When you graduate as a newly minted police officer, what happens then? Every job has a culture, a group of beliefs and behaviors that management and members of the business or the job attempt to push onto new employees. Why wouldn't it be the same for police? So today, I'm going to interview That Dang Dad. At one time, he was a police officer. Now he advocates for the abolition of police. And today we will talk about his experience with the indoctrination of police culture and the lessons he was taught on the job training as a cop. But first, some poison.
So, what's your poison?
Okay, so today my poison is the Joker Ultra Red Mad Energy Drink. This is the Circle K brand knockoff energy drink. You can get like 2 of them for $4. They're cheap, they're delicious, they taste pretty aspartame-y, which is just fine for me. And I drink these fucking things multiple times a day like they're going out of style. I rate them a 10 out of 10 because they do everything I need them to do. Coffee is generally better, but coffee is too hot to drink when you first pour it, whereas this fucking thing is always ready to go.
Like sometimes coffee is just too hot to drink and I need cold caffeine, so that's a good option.
For my poison, I have the Urban Craft Beer Lager. It's just like Urban Cellar's own beer, and it's fine. Very light and summery.
Such a glowing review.
It's fridge beer. What do you expect?
I am having my arthritis medication with a Diet A&W root beer chaser. One of the sad parts about getting older is things start to break down, and apparently I have arthritis now. So meds will help me perk right back up.
Diet A&W root beer, which is even better than regular A&W root beer, in my opinion.
It is so hard to find. Seriously, to go to like any grocery store and try to find it. Like anytime I'm at the co-op, see they have any of it in stock, it's just like load up that cart like I'm some sort of hoarder, you know?
I tell you, we're going to grind at this podcast thing for 5 more years, and then we're going to hit it big and get our own CNN special. Then I'm going to buy you some new metal legs, Richard.
Thank you. Like some sort of like awesome bionic legs that I can, you know, crush my enemies with, and like I don't know. I don't necessarily need legs. How would you just get me like a mech, like one of those mech warrior mechs?
Oh yeah, like nuclear hydraulic, like you can take a convoy protester to the moon.
That's right. Yeah, and I got like heat sinks and jump jets and like different kind of missiles and stuff. And yeah,
we could just take your brain out of your head and put it into the chest of a giant guy, like on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with Krang.
There we go. Yeah, there you go.
Just be an evil brain.
The minute the podcast makes it big, that's the first thing on the list we're buying. We're making you into a mech, Richard.
Hell yeah.
I'm just drinking coffee. It's dollar store coffee. The dollar store doesn't always sell coffee, but this week it did, and it has that classic chemically taste that I love with dollar store coffee. It feels like they just like some instant coffee and mixed in some dirt and like cricket parts into it, but it has caffeine in it. I can feel it working, so I love it.
Yeah, there you go.
Dang, Dad, what are you drinking?
Right now, water, boring old water. But a minute ago, I was day drinking some Duncan Taylor 12-year Scotch, and I give it high marks because it's very affordable, but it's still smooth. It doesn't taste like medicine or whatever. So
I'll have to pass that along to my husband because he is very Scotchy.
There's got to be some kind of label bias with liquors. Like, there's got to be cheap stuff that tastes just fine and expensive stuff that tastes like shit.
100%. In fact, you want a hot tip? Trader Joe's, their bourbon is one of the best bourbons I've ever had, and it's $15.
Whoa!
And it's because they source it, but they don't market. I mean, Trader Joe's doesn't do commercials or anything like that. But yeah, you can get phenomenal bourbon for $15 at Trader Joe's.
If only we had a fucking Trader Joe's in Canada.
Apparently, like Kirkland, like their vodka is the same as Grey Goose.
Oh shit!
Yeah, and like I have a Costco membership.
Oh, we should do a Costco trip. I got to fill up my gas tanks.
Fuck yeah. Let me know.
Occultae Veritatis goes to Costco.
We investigate the free samples. Just how free are they?
Just how free are they? This tastes like liberty. That's how free they are.
Chief, you were a police officer for 34 years. The first 28 in San Diego, the last 6 in Seattle as the chief of police. But do you mind just walking us back and say, why were you attracted to law enforcement to begin with?
I became a cop accidentally. I had a friend who was taking a civil service test at the War Memorial Building in Balboa Park in San Diego, and he asked me if I wanted to accompany him. I passed the test. He didn't. He was one of those people who wanted to be a cop since he was 3. I had kind of uneasy, if not unpleasant, experiences with the police, was not really much of a fan at age 20 when I took the test. But I passed it and then got sucked into the culture very, very quickly and learned an awful lot about the institution over the years.
So, Chief, when you say you got sucked into the culture, what do you mean by that?
At the time that I became a police officer, it was with the idea that I was going to be different from the officers I had experienced in my young life, that I would not use excessive force. I would never use the N-word. I would never laugh at the really cruel jokes that were told in the locker room or the front seat of a police car. But within 5 minutes, I'm doing almost all of that. I never did succumb to the temptation to use the N-word, but it was all around me. And it was something that within 5 minutes time, figuratively speaking, I was saying and doing things that I'd never said, never done before. And I'm ashamed of those days. I wouldn't trade them for anything because I carry to this day a cellular memory of just how powerful that culture is.
Well, you were in it for 3 decades, so you must have liked it. So what is it that you liked about it?
The short answer is, for the first 14 months on the job, I was abusing the very people I had been hired to protect and serve. And then I got slapped upside the head by a principled prosecutor who asked me if the Constitution of the United States meant anything to me. I was furious with him. I was the one that was out there on the mean streets, San Diego. I was out there during the heat and the cold, once again, San Diego. But I was in the real world, and he was prowling the hallways of the courthouse. And what gave him the right to judge me and the arrest that I had made? The arrest, by the way, was a false arrest. In other words, I had violated the law. I had violated the Constitution, and he wanted no part of that. And he told me so. I went from anger to embarrassment to shame in sort of a breathtakingly short period of time, and decided then and there, that's it. I am going to change. And I did.
Do you have any sympathy for some of these men and women on the street, though? I mean, particularly after 9/11, they were told they were heroes. You're heroes. I mean, you saw these posters, recruiting posters all over town. Be a hero, right? Be a guardian, be a hero. And now people are saying, get your knee off this man's neck. You people are killers. You know what I mean? I mean, it just seems as though, do you kind of see where for some people that's a head snap?
It is a head snap. I'm admitting it to you. It's a head snap for me because I did not believe that we would see the outpouring of anger at what that officer did back on May 25th. I really do believe that we are at a crossroads in policing. People inside and outside the system are saying what we saw when that knee hit that neck and all of that officer's body weight was pressed against a fellow human being saying that he can't breathe for almost 9 minutes. So we're saying absolutely never again. Never again. Well, we've seen it since. We will continue to see it until the system itself changes.
Well, I mean, but you study these things for years. You had these instincts, as you tell us, from when you were a very young officer. I mean, really early in your career, you had these instincts. And yet when the time came for you to make a fundamental break with the way crowd control was done, you didn't do it. Known for Seattle's response to the protests at the WTO, the World Trade Organization's ministerial conference in 1999, which led to your resignation, where you did use chemical agents. I mean, you did all the things that you criticize people for doing. And so that's one of the reasons that I asked the question. And we constantly hear for years, for decades, we've been hearing out reform and better relationships. And yet when push comes to shove, we still see people putting their knees on somebody's neck, tasing them, shooting them after they were stopped for a DUI. Why does it seem to not ever come from the dissertation to practice on the streets? Why is that?
I'll give you the most honest answer I can, and that is that we are so conditioned to organizational life, to institutional life, as we've known it, as we've grown up in that system. See, when I grew up in the system, we were using tear gas as something that tactical experts would call a force multiplier. You don't have enough cops to clear an intersection, bring out the gas and apply liberally. That was a part of our central nervous system, built into the DNA of the police paramilitary bureaucracy. And it's an incredibly strong, resilient bureaucracy.
Describe your training at the academy.
Yeah, so when I was trying to get hired, I'd say 23 at the time. Didn't have a lot of life experience, grew up in a pretty sheltered life or whatever. And so I had a hard time getting hired on any police department. So I put myself through the academy. A lot of academies will let you pay your own way through, and then you just, you get your certificate, and then it's a little bit easier to get a job later. So my academy was a part-time academy. So I went for 10 months on nights and weekends. In the state of California, where I got certified, it was a total of, I believe, 1,010 hours. And California was the highest hour requirement out of any state in the nation at that time. Although our police academy was on the level above a beauty school, and the beauty school required more hours than our police academy did.
Oh boy.
When I did the police training episode, I found shockingly low amount of hours for how long police are in training for.
Oh, yes. Places like Florida and Georgia and Mississippi were like, 600 hours, 500 hours, half the time we did it. I have no idea what they learned in that amount of time, but God bless them.
Well, and I've heard that too, like the amount of time American police officers in academy spend learning about de-escalation techniques as opposed to how to shoot to kill is like crazy screwed up compared to what we do in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a session on, they called it verbal judo. Because you can't just call it de-escalation, because that's wiener talk. It's
wiener
verbal
talk.
judo. But yeah, I mean, we did maybe a class on it, like maybe 8 hours. I can't think of very much de-escalation training that we did in the academy.
Because I know like police in the city of Toronto spend literally hundreds of hours doing like psychological de-escalation training.
I can't even fathom that. That's was not my experience over in California.
Of the training you did receive, did you receive any that especially stands out in your mind as like, oh fuck, they taught me that back in the academy?
To be honest with you, I wouldn't say that we learned too much in the academy that I would consider problematic, other than just kind of the general, like, everybody out there's trying to kill you. If you're not ready to fight for your life at any given moment, you're going to die on duty. Like that kind of like anxiety training that they gave us. But in terms of, racial stuff or anything like that, in the academy, that curriculum is really regulated by the state, and so I went through California. It tends to be on the slightly more liberal side.
It would be hard to put that stuff on paper and get away with it. Like, it'd be hard to implement. That'd be too easy to catch.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we had instructors who would, they would tell their little war stories, because cops love telling war stories, that, you would kind of get the sense that they kind of want to talk about different groups a certain way. But as far as official training, I would say no. It was all the stuff that you're kind of thinking of, problematic and racial type stuff, that comes sort of unofficially once you're on the job.
Apex Mayor Jacques Gilbert's social justice protests last summer were in part what spurred Town Council to request a cultural assessment of its own police department.
It's clearly indicated that we have work to do.
The assessment conducted by Diversity Solutions HR says racial bias was entrenched in the department. Quote, officers were comfortable making comments that were blatantly racist. The report quotes officers as saying, quote, BLM is an anarchy to create division and overthrow the police. And quote, we keep riffraff out of Apex, we only see blue.
The Minnesota Department of Human Rights reviewed 700 hours of body camera video, conducted thousands of interviews, and observed training sessions. The report finding racial disparities in how officers interact with people of color.
MPD officers are almost 2 times as likely to search Black community members.
Officers using covert social media to falsely engage with organizations like the NAACP unrelated to criminal activity, and says they consistently use racist, misogynistic, and disrespectful language.
I found the contents to be repugnant, at times horrific.
The report blaming the discriminatory policing in part on deficient training and insufficient and ineffective accountability systems. Alleging despite new use of force policies announced after Floyd's murder, the department, quote, failed to implement and train on the updated policy in a meaningful way.
There is no place in the Minneapolis Police Department for bias or discrimination.
Today, Detroit's chief of police and mayor stood shoulder to shoulder after a several months-long investigation here at the 6th Precinct, exposing a culture of racism within the precinct and also leading to sweeping change.
Priceless.
This disturbing video, posted to the social media site Snapchat, followed a Detroit police traffic stop near Joy Road and Stout in late January.
Walk of sheep in the cold.
An internal investigation found both officers Gary Steele and Michael Garrison took part in those awful remarks towards an African-American girl instructed to walk home in the cold.
Bye, Felicia.
Both men have since been fired.
This is not how we treat our community. And if you decide to go down that path, as the mayor already indicated, zero tolerance.
Ariel Moore, the young woman mocked in this video, may never have known if not for the social media post we showed her. And yet the mayor and chief agree their audit found many more issues that went far beyond this incident.
When Steele and Garrison were patrolling, 2/3 of everybody working were white males. Many in the precinct became racially tone deaf. It became ingrained in the culture, and some did not see it as being wrong.
When you started working as a police officer after graduation, did you encounter like an internal culture?
I grew up in pretty sheltered, white areas of Texas and California. When I got hired in an agency in Los Angeles County in a community that was predominantly first and second generation immigrant, Hispanic, from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador. So there's a definite culture shock for me just in general. Like I had never hung out in cities like that. I'd never hung out in populations like that. I was having to learn Spanish on the job and stuff like that. And so I really relied on my training officers to tell me how to navigate this community. You know, it was a completely different culture. And so, you know, one of the first things that I got told was, this is this part of town, it's a macho town. It's a machismo culture. And so if you show weakness in front of men in this culture, they will laugh at you and, razz you and hassle you and stuff like that. So you have to act tough. You have to get in people's faces and prove that you're a macho man. Otherwise they're not going to respect you. My agency was very concerned with what they would call officer safety, but what you would call intimidating the public. I was trained that, you know, everybody in this town, they're all gangsters and drug dealers, and they're looking for the weak links. I was encouraged to be aggressive. I was encouraged to swear at people, call them names, to dress them down, to kind of dehumanize them and humiliate them in front of their peers. There was a lot of gang activity in our area. And so one of the things that one of my instructors taught me was, he said, hey, you know, if you're ever detaining a bunch of gangsters and one of them is talking a lot of shit, that guy's probably the leader. You know, he's somebody that they look up to. And if you let him talk shit to you, all the other guys are going to think that they can do that to you too. And it's going to be an officer safety issue. So I was trained to identify whoever was the leader and either, you know, insult them or get rough with them, slap them, slap them in front of their friends and call them a bitch. And because, you know, they wouldn't feel comfortable responding.
And what are they going to do? Call the cops? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who are you going to call? You know, and I was trained that was an officer safety issue. If you don't do those things, the gangs are going to think you're weak and turn on you and kill you. And so that was kind of the culture that I came into. And that was not my natural mode. You know, like I said, I came out of a really sheltered, privileged life. And, you know, in the police academy, they make certain gestures and overtures towards saying like, hey, you know, you should do community-oriented policing. And it's important for you to get out in the community and find out what they need and respect the people. But when I got actually on the job, it was much more about showing that you are dominant and making them be submissive.
You got to be tough. You can't let them punk you or they're going to get you. You got to get them or they'll get you. Or if you appear weak and vulnerable to anyone, that's the moment they're going to strike and that kind of shit.
For what?
Because I told you to.
You haven't have a reason, sir. You didn't pull me over. But you didn't pull me over.
Get the license out or I'll hit for a backup and I'll take you out of the car.
Call your driver's license. Call your supervisor, sir.
Get your driver's license out right now.
Call your supervisor. Please call your supervisor. Because you're not pulling me over neither.
You get your driver's license out right now. Show me ID.
Call your supervisor. What do you need my ID for, sir?
Well, because you want to run your mouth to me.
No, because you was looking at my license plate. For what?
Exactly.
For what? You don't have the right to run this.
I got my rights to do anything I want to do. I'm a police officer.
You can't run
that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. I'll pull you over and I'll tow your car.
And I wanted to ask, like, on the topic of sort of like showing your dominance to people, how much of that dominance or like that need for like to maintain power is based in like post-traumatic stress? Like how many of your fellow officers were probably suffering with PTSD and that was part of how it manifested?
One of the things that I talk about in my videos a lot is, you know, one of the things that they do in the academy is they show you hundreds of videos of police officers being murdered on duty. And in very like shocking ways, like somebody pulls over a guy for running a red light and a dude gets out of the car with a rifle and just guns him down right on the street. And they show you that over and over and over again. They say, hey, this could happen to you. This could happen to you. And then, you know, the people that were training me, I had training officers that had come up in LAPD, you know, in the 60s and 70s and stuff like that. And, you know, they would just tell these stories about like, yeah, there I was in the alley getting the shit kicked out of me by 20 Black Panthers, you know, and a lot of it was, you know, let's say exaggerated retellings of things that may or may not have happened. But
one more Black Panther added every year. Yeah.
Every year they gain 20 pounds. But police officers do legitimately see terrible things on duty, and you know, police officers do get assaulted and do get killed on duty. And so a lot of the people that were training me had, you know, seen some nasty things and had bad things happen to them. And so, yeah, I think PTSD does play a large part of it. And just this constant drumbeat of everybody out there is trying to kill you. it's that kind of low level. Even if an officer hadn't had an attempted assault on them or an attempted murder, they believed it, and it was like this mantra, like, you're going to die if you're not ready to commit violence, if you're not ready to react. Today could be your day, the day they decide to take you out. And it's just that really wears you down 5, 10, 15 years on the job.
No kidding.
The cartels in Mexico, and the cartels are a whole different story. I trained the Border Patrol, I trained the DEA. The cartels are as evil as ISIS ever dreamed of being. Funny how the media stayed neutral throughout this whole war, yeah? We got to be objective observers, but cut a reporter's head off, suddenly everything changes, yeah? Well, the cartels are smart enough not to cut an American reporters off. The cartels will kidnap your spouse, saw her head off, and send you the video. They're as evil as ISIS ever dreamed of being, and they come at us like a freight train. They just kicked Mexico's tail. Yeah, the body count's down in Mexico because Mexico gave up. It's too easy to just take the bribe and back off and let them have their way. And they're coming at us like a freight train, folks. That's my law enforcement side of the world, a whole different angle. In 2009 alone, we had 600 reported attacks on schools and school children in Afghanistan in 1 year alone. 600 attacks on schools and school children. Their own kids, their own schools, their own nation in 1 year. You think they won't do it to us? The media doesn't want to think about it. The bad man's gone. Leave us alone. The bad man is not gone. And very, very bad times are coming, and we can look around the planet and see what they're doing. For 14 years, headed our way. For 14 years, we hunted them down across the planet and killed them with impunity. Now it's their turn, and they're going to come kill the kids. Around the world when this happens. It's a military's job. We're elite federal troops. We're elite federal police teams, with a couple exceptions. One major exception is Israel. They've learned in 50 years of war, the only answer is armed people everywhere charging toward the sound of the guns from every direction. Another major exception is America, posse comitatus. By law, the military cannot get involved until Congress gives them the authority. The local police are the Delta Force. They are the Green Beret. Our strength is that we have given the responsibility and the tools right down to the lowest level. And it's their job to go on like thunder, and they don't have a choice. Do you understand that we're at war? And do you understand that our cops are the frontline troops in this war? They're psychologically, professionally destroyed human beings if they don't go in, yes? And in the middle of that, people are trying to gut and disarm our cops. Think about that. We're at war. They're the frontline troops in this war. In the very near future, the people attacking our cops will look like the biggest idiots on the face of the planet. When they come to murder the children, when we realize we're at war and they're the frontline troops, those idiots will crawl back in their slimy little holes and try to pretend they never said that stupid stuff.
Talking about the statement "Blue Lives Matter" or the whole concept of blue lives. At least what we hear from the United States echo chamber is that a lot of cops and a lot of folks who are associated with them are blue lives is a big deal, and they should be a protected species almost. What's your opinion of that?
When we talk about, we're talking earlier about behind the scenes culture, I often describe law enforcement as like a cult, in that you come into this insular group through the police academy, and through the training is very rigorous and very aggressive. They really break you down and build you back up. One of the manifestations of that is that police officers, particularly in the United States, become this in group, and they're the only ones that get you. They're the only ones that understand you. You're working weekend graveyards, you're missing holidays with your family, you're missing your friends. I stopped going to church because I was working weekends, and that got me out of church entirely. I was already on my way out, but that really accelerated it. But police really become your family and your only sort of intimate connection, the people that really understand what it's like to do that job and to see the things that you see. And so I think a lot of American police officers are like, no, you don't understand. It isn't just a job. It changes you. It becomes a part of your identity. And so a lot of police officers feel in their hearts that, no, we are a blue life because that's part of my identity. It's part of who I am. It's like a religion. It's as important. It's as foundational. And so, yeah, I think it's horribly offensive that, Black Lives Matter became a mantra because Black lives were being killed as if they didn't matter. every time a police officer dies, they get a huge funeral. 500 people show up. They stop traffic. They do 21 gun salutes. They play the bagpipes. Everybody cries and hugs each other and says never again. That never happens when Black people die, right? So the situations are completely different, but police officers are so self-centered and so focused on the cult of police that they don't see that difference.
So do you think that the cult-like nature, is that sort of helps, reinforce the blue wall of silence that exists among police officers?
Yeah, 100%. These are your, they'll tell you is hey, when you're screaming for help on the radio, who's coming to save you? It ain't the public. It ain't your mommy. It ain't your wife. It ain't your kids. It's us, right? We're the ones coming to save you. And so from an in-group perspective, on the one hand, why would I want to hurt the people that are coming to save my life if I ever need help? From another perspective, I knew stories about guys that had ratted out fellow officers, that had been a whistleblower in their department. And there were times when they were screaming for help on the radio and help did not come because those officers were not well liked. They were seen as rats, things like that. And so there's a self-preservation that, if I say anything, if I fuck with this, I might not get help when I need it, and who knows what might happen.
Is there some, experience you have with this, and any way to dismantle it, or how to get people to, punch through the wall of silence?
I mean,
or is it just so entrenched in the culture that they're not able to, that there's no foreseeable dismantling of that wall in the near future?
I genuinely did work with really compassionate, competent, just officers. I worked with legitimately good people who had legitimately good hearts, cared about the community, wanted to see people thrive, believed that what they were doing was, an act of service to the community, who didn't, who weren't corrupt, didn't abuse their power and their privilege. I worked with a lot of great people, and those people never ratted, never said anything, never went against their fellow officers, never reported when they saw something corrupt or abusive happening. So that's what I always say. You could be the best, most virtuous officer in the world. I never knew a single one that ratted out another officer who wasn't, on the up and up. And it's what I always tell people. People say, oh, my daddy was a cop and he's a great guy. I always say, well, ask him, how many guys did he rat out unprompted? How many times did he go to internal affairs and say what he saw? I'll bet it was never. Yeah. Nobody did.
So those cops that want people to thrive, is it a result of that pressure of backing the blue, that nobody understands us like we understand you, because we understand what being a cop is like because we are cops? Is that other group kind of indoctrination? Is that what's causing them to be so silent?
Yeah. I mean, I think, law enforcement is a very, so it's paramilitary. It runs on the same kinds of cultural fuel that something like the Marine Corps does. You know how ex-military people are. You know how that kind of thing is. And so it's a profession that has rigorous training. It's exclusive. I mean, it might be hard for you to believe, but it's actually pretty hard to become a cop, particularly in California. I mean, you look at all the very bad cops that you see now. There were 100 guys that didn't get in that were even worse, and so it's hard to get in. You have to work your ass off to do it. And so there's a sense of pride and prestige, and there's a sense of camaraderie and a sense of family. And so, if you've ever had a family member who's, kind of problematic, but you kind of love them anyway because they're your family, and you just agree to disagree because you just have to keep the peace at Christmas and Thanksgiving. I mean, that's kind of what it's like. Even if you're a good guy trying to do the right thing and the guy next to you is a bad guy not trying to do the right thing, it's like, well, what are you going to do? And the culture of law enforcement, particularly with how strong the unions are, even if you wanted to rat out a fellow officer, there's a low likelihood that anything's going to happen to them. Unless it's extremely egregious and you have video proof and you're going to go to the mat and stand behind your convictions. Police unions are so strong. The protections for officers are so strong that at best they're going to get an unpaid day off. And then your name is mud in law enforcement for the rest of your career. And so the cost benefit, it just isn't there.
I hate to say this, but it doesn't come as a complete surprise to me that whistleblowers face retaliation. But we are talking about career destroying, in some cases, mental health destroying retaliation. Go through it for us. Break down what your report found.
It's not a surprise to a lot of people that officers who speak out against the misconduct or make misconduct claims against other officers are often targeted, demoted, fired, intimidated, and all of that. But I think one of the things that we reported and what we found in our research was that the ways in which this retaliation happened was so uniform across the board. We found the same types of retaliation happening in big cities and in rural areas. We found that male officers, female officers, Black officers, white officers, officers of different religions, officers of different ages, all face the same types of retaliation, almost sometimes hearing things verbatim from their peers and police chiefs and other people in the system. So I think one of the things that our investigation revealed was how systematic some of these patterns are. The kinds of retaliation and intimidation we found stretched way beyond just, hey, you reported on this, or you talked about this and you're fired. Some officers in some cases were reassigned to less favorable shifts. There's going to be a story that we have coming out next week where one officer was assigned to pick up roadkill after he reported on the misconduct of the chief in his area. Some other things that we found were that, other officers intimidated the officers that came forward, including making death threats against them. We had one case where an officer had a fellow officer who'd been friends with him for 20 years. And once he found out that he came forward, he said, hey, if you link this back to me, I'm going to put a bullet in your head. Those are the kinds of things that happen, not just the fact that these officers are shunned by their departments, but they lose a sense of community and the relationships that they built over a long time. One of the things I want to make clear is that what folks told us in our reporting, experts who have looked into this, is that the point of the code of silence is that we'll never know the full extent to how it affects officers. But for the officers that we've talked to, it's ruined marriages. People have developed addictions. There's been a ton of police officers who have gone bankrupt, even trying to just fight against the police departments that they feel targeted them in the court system.
The issue of police unions and the role that they play always come up. What did you uncover?
There are cases across the country where they have done that. There's a case in our data set where a police officer in New York reported on a quota system and the union backed him in that regard. There are other cases that we reported on where the opposite happened. There was a case in Connecticut where a police officer spoke out and cooperated with the federal government against some of his fellow officers. And one of the officers that was involved allegedly put a gun to his chest. And after that officer went to prison, he was able to obtain a paid position within the police union in that area. So what we see across the board is it's not uniform, but we do see cases where the union often will back the officers who were accused of misconduct over the officers who reported the misconduct. And that's what we reported in our story that ran recently.
So I'm sure that you were present as a police officer for like a controversial police event to happen. I don't know if you were a police officer when one happened in your local department or nationally, but I guess the question I'm asking is, when a giant embarrassing thing happens in the police world, like video comes out of a police officer murdering somebody unarmed, or a giant thing of corruption comes out, what happens behind closed doors at the morning meeting or whatever? What are cops told about what to think about this incident? And Like, what kind of conversations are happening when one of these embarrassing incidents comes out?
It kind of depends. In Los Angeles County, one of the big embarrassing things that happened was LAPD. There was a division called Rampart Division that was corrupt to a level comical, like, or not comical, really, like corrupt to a level like a TV show. I mean, they were the police officers were robbing drug dealers, selling drugs, threatening people, threatening to kill people. I think they shot and paralyzed a guy to intimidate him, who was a rival drug dealer. I mean, just nasty stuff, extremely dark stuff. And
holy shit.
Look up Rampart.
Like a bad movie, like a bad cop movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Look up the Rampart Division scandal. It's a great, not a great story, but it's a story. And, something like that, fellow officers in the surrounding communities, fellow officers at LAPD, a lot of them were mad at those cops because it's like, hey, we get enough shit for doing our job the right way, as we were trained to do it. We get enough shit already. You've made all of us look terrible. You've made all of us look really bad. So something like a Rampart scandal was not supported or defended culturally in law enforcement. But something like the Rodney King scandal, which, if you recall the footage, scandalized America because footage came out of all of these officers standing around a man on the ground and beating him with sticks, with nightclubs. And to look at the video, it really shocked the conscience. And, the nation really took notice of that. But behind closed doors, I was told, well, the public didn't really understand that video because that's how LAPD was trained at the time, was to give a command, issue a strike, give a command, issue a strike. So I was told that actually the Rodney King beating was within proper training and it just looked bad because of the camera. But really, they were doing what they were trained to do. And so it kind of depends, there's certain examples where somebody gets shot and they're unarmed, like in Ferguson with Mike Brown, where we would have said, hey, that kid was he was a big guy, a big intimidating dude. He assaulted the officer. The officer feared for his life. What was he supposed to do? Just because the kid was unarmed doesn't mean the officer can't fear for his life if he thinks Mike was trying to take his gun or do something else. And so, behind closed doors, that Ferguson shooting, a lot of officers consider that justified. Like, too bad, don't attack a cop. What do you think was going to happen? And on the other hand, Tamir Rice, 12 years old, playing with a toy gun, the officers showed up and shot him within 1 second on the scene. I know most officers that saw that I talked to about it thought that was completely inappropriate. That was a full-on fuck up that shouldn't have happened. So it really just depends on how egregious it is or how much plausible deniability that there is. Well, you didn't see the full footage. Well, you didn't see it the way we saw. You don't understand, that kind of thing.
Are there any attitudes within police culture or like on the job training that are discouraged? Like, are you discouraged from being too empathetic or showing too much like humanitarian concern? Like, are things like that discouraged at all? Because I see a lot of cops acting very coldly towards people. And I wonder if that's just I've seen a lot experience thing, or if they're kind of taught to like show less empathy and less humanity.
You were told to treat people professionally, but I'll tell you, like I said, all cops telling war stories. I'll tell you one of mine. We had an incident where a gangster led our police department on I think 2-hour car chase all over Los Angeles County, on the freeway and through the streets. Very dangerous, high speeds, all kinds of stuff. Well, that happened to our day shift. And so as I was coming onto my night shift, they were just getting back. This guy had flipped his car. There'd been a huge car accident. They had to take him to the hospital. And so when I was on night shift, they were bringing him back to our station to book him. And so as the rookie on night shift, I got told once he was booked, I went to go take him to county jail because we didn't house our prisoners at that location. They had beaten the shit out of this guy so bad, and he was only wearing boxer shorts. And so when they took him in to book him, they never gave him any clothes. They didn't give him a jumpsuit. They were punishing him for leading him on the chase and things like that. So they were really milking it. So they didn't give him any clothes while he was being booked into the station. So when I was transporting him, he was in his underwear in the back of my car being transported to the county jail. And I got a flat tire. And so, and it was a cold night, even for California. And so I had to get towed back to the police department, and it was freezing. It was so cold. And so I gave him my jacket, and we come back into the station. I'm radioing in, hey, I had a flat tire, I got to switch cars. And a couple of the other officers came out to see what was going on. And they saw me letting that guy wear my police jacket while he was shivering in the cold in his underwear. And when I got back to the station later by myself, I got my ass chewed out. They said, what the hell are you doing? That guy led us on a chase. We could have been killed. What do you do giving him your jacket? I'm like, he was fucking freezing. Like, I told him, I said, we won. He's under arrest. He's in jail. Like, what more do you want to do to this guy? You want to fucking kill him? Like,
yeah, no kidding.
But they were so mad at me for showing him the basic level of humanity because he was quote unquote a bad guy and quote unquote didn't deserve it.
Man, that reminds me so like extrajudicial punishments from police. That reminds me so much of a local thing that happens around Saskatoon, and I'm sure it's not just a local thing. I'm sure it happens in lots of communities, but they're called the Starlight Tours around here, and that's where police would pick up mostly Indigenous people, drive them to the outskirts of town, often in the middle of winter, and make them walk back. And most of them made it back, but the police ended up killing and maiming a lot of people doing this. And I think it was for the same reason, kind of like, fuck them, let's punish them for being who they are, like attitude. Nothing legal, nothing judicial. They didn't charge them with anything ever. They just wanted to punish them.
It was seen as an officer safety issue. If your department had a reputation for being heavy-handed, it was thought that people wouldn't want to commit crimes in your city. I remember one time a car with a few gangsters was rolling through town. They were from another city, and we stopped them, got them out of the car, and we were just kind of low-level fucking with them like we do. And I remember one of them turned to the other and said, man, I knew we shouldn't have driven through here. These guys are the fucking worst. And I remember we were high-fiving each other going, hell yeah, we are the fucking worst. Like, stay out of our town. So we saw that as a way to, you know, in a perverse way, prevent crime. Because, hey, if you commit a crime in our city, we're going to get you, and you're not going to like it.
This is just me assuming, because like I see cops in videos during arrests, like doing little things to cause more pain or more discomfort. Like, do you learn, for lack of a better term, little life hacks about how to subtly like fuck with and make citizens' lives more uncomfortable? You can put the handcuffs on this way if you really want them to hurt and stuff like that.
Oh, 100%. One of the first things a lot of us did, you know, you get issued your standard issue handcuffs that have the little chain so you can kind of move your hands around a little bit and get comfortable. Well, there's another kind of cuffs that don't have a chain. They have a metal bar that does not let your wrists turn. Everybody goes out and buys those because they're extremely painful to wear. And if you put them on people's wrists in a certain way, it's extremely uncomfortable. It cuts into their skin. People will do that on purpose. We learn little, you know, things you can do to you know, when you're patting somebody down to check for weapons, you can hold their knuckles together in certain ways that will make them squirm. And he's squirming, got to take him down. That kind of stuff. There was a lot of people that I worked with that knew all kinds of little tricks to make people jump or squirm or yelp or react in a certain way so that they could then, you know, take the guy down, beat him up, do whatever.
He's resisting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How much of your time in training was devoted to how to deal with people who are having mental health crises?
In the police academy, very little, I would say. We had just a 1 8-hour day doing it, or 2 4-hour courses or whatever. Once I was hired on, you know, during briefings at the start of your shift, you know, we were supposed to be doing trainings every month, every quarter. About once a quarter, maybe once a month, the state of California would send us a DVD that had some training that we were supposed to do. And it would be just this like 20-minute, here's how to deal with people with cerebral palsy. And we would just stick around on our phones. You know, there was supposed to be a quiz that we were supposed to take. The sergeant would give us all the answers so that we all got hundreds. It was not taken seriously. It was not considered a big priority. It was not something that we spent a lot of time worrying about.
As someone with multiple mental illnesses and with a fairly extensive history of dealing with police, what you just said absolutely terrifies the fuck out of me.
Yeah, it should. I got into, well after I got out of law enforcement, I got into accessibility, and then through that, disability justice, and just looking back on my career at how much worse I made things for people who didn't deserve that. You know, it fills me with a lot of shame. And just anger that, I just can't believe that was what we did to people who weren't hurting anybody. They were just having a mental health crisis. They were just having a bad day. And unfortunately, the culture of law enforcement was such that became reason to punish them instead of help them. It makes me furious and sad.
I have 2 labels I'll carry for the rest of my life: bipolar and convicted felon. They're not mutually exclusive. I've been arrested 6 different times, all the while in a delusional, paranoid state of mind caused by my illness. What you know about society and how people typically behave doesn't apply to me. I enter a department store and it feels right to immediately take off my shoes. I'm convinced the government is plotting to control me, playing carefully selected songs on the radio to persuade me into making a certain decision. So I change the station just to spite them. I throw 3 fingers up at a public security camera and tell President Obama to read between the lines. No, the rules of society don't apply to me, not when I'm having one of my episodes.
I just raised my hand like this.
My episodes, which are rare, can happen at any time and take many forms, from creating a piece of art to aggressively accusing UPS employees of being government workers smuggling weapons through their delivery routes. I'm not alone. More than half of all prison and jail inmates have a mental health issue. You can imagine the kind of reaction someone like me might have when delusions trigger an incident in which a police officer wants to engage with me, or worse, arrest me. 3 of my 6 arrests went relatively well, with police getting me into custody safely. The other 3 were extremely violent because in my head I was fighting for my life. I was tased in the back of the police car in our hospital parking lot with leg irons and handcuffs on. And one of my charges that night were destruction of county property because I broke the leg irons.
Earlier you said that they don't really teach anything overtly bigoted or overtly racist, sexist, anti-citizen, stuff like that in the academy. If it was in those training books or in those lectures, it would be a bit too straightforward. But you mentioned that some of that was in on-the-job training. Would you describe some of that you encountered, some of the on-the-job training for like bigoted or discriminatory attitudes?
When I was coming up, there's a particular sergeant that I can recall that is kind of just so emblematic of this. Just an absolute full-on, no joke, no getting around it racist. Just a full-on bigoted motherfucker who was in charge of my shift for a lot of my career. And, he used to, especially when I was on training, he would pull me aside and, he was a white guy. And like I mentioned, the area that we patrolled was predominantly Hispanic and predominantly first and second generation immigrant. He would tell me, privately, as on calls and things like that, and he had this nasty voice too. His voice just matched his demeanor. But it was like, these people, these fucking immigrants, they come up here, they think they're going to turn our community into Juarez, like where they came from. And I'm not going to allow it. You can't let them. If you let them, they'll turn this into their little dirty shithole towns that they come from. You can't let them do this, And, this guy was just very convinced that undocumented immigrants were going to come turn California into Mexico. And he took every opportunity that he could to make them miserable, to drive them away, to entice them to leave or go somewhere else, And so I worked with a few guys that were like overtly racist like that, I would say.
Even as San Francisco Police Chief Greg Suhr said he was sorry,
I apologize to the community.
The community did not hold back.
I hope you all fire every one of those 7 police officers and give them no benefits. They don't have the right, they don't deserve to be on this police force.
Commissioners, terminate those officers on recommendation of Chief Suhr and do it now.
This meeting, the first step in a process that could end in termination for a group of San Francisco police officers caught sending racist and homophobic text messages. This San Francisco officer reminded the board of some of the deeply offensive epithets the officers called African Americans in the texts.
Silverback gorillas, N-words, monkeys. I feel personally betrayed by our department because of my dedication and loyalty and service to this city is still not respected by some.
Chief Sir says 2 of the 8 officers have already resigned. A third has promised to. The others are all suspended, and Sir has recommended termination.
Mainly I worked with guys that were more sort of systemically racist, I guess I would say, where it wasn't that they were personally in their heart of hearts white supremacists or anything like that, but they believed in law and order, and there are rules. And so if the rules say that you can't drive without a driver's license, well then by God, you can't do it. So in California, there's a lot of rules that disproportionately affected immigrants. Like if you couldn't get a driver's license, there were laws that, we could use to mess with you. And there were guys that took great glee in messing with people who didn't have driver's licenses. And you're like, well, they got to learn to follow the rules.
Easy way to get a good arrest, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And like they would convince themselves that, no, they're just standing up for law and order. But what it really was is that they were disproportionately punishing people who were immigrants, and they wouldn't see that in themselves, but that was very much a part of their attitude and the culture at the time.
Sounds like all those people that say, like, if you don't want to get shot by cops, then don't break the law.
Exactly.
As if it's, that black and white and that simple.
Yeah, or like the idea that the only people who need to worry about cops are bad guys. Like, as someone who's not a bad guy, cops scare the shit out of me.
Yes, me too. I'm a white woman, and I'm scared of the cops.
And like, I've got a almost 4-year-old son, and it's very difficult for me to look him in the face and say, hey, like, police officers are your friends. When you're in trouble, you should go to the police. Because I know that's what the police always say, like, teach your kids not to fear the police. But fuck, honestly, like, maybe teaching your kids to fear the police isn't the worst thing.
Pretty sure that I'm teaching my child to fear the police just a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough. I have a 3-year-old, and just the other day, she snuck out on us and got a little bit way down the block. Somebody thought somebody was watching her and somebody else thought somebody was watching her. She snuck out, and it was one of those things where I thought, man, is this something where I train her if she's in trouble to look for the nice man in uniform to help her if she gets lost, if she sneaks out or something like that? It's really tough because my dad was a former cop. So she goes over to Pep's house and he's got pictures of himself in uniform and he's so proud to be a cop. And, my mom is super proud of him. There are no pictures of me in uniform in our house. Like, we don't do the propaganda stuff. I don't brag about it. I don't talk about it a lot, and it's really hard to know how to train her to handle that because you're right. Like, the police are dangerous, but my daughter is a little tiny blonde white girl. So she's probably got the best chance of not being fucked with. Yeah, I'm not sure how to handle that. And it's a real struggle for me.
It's maddening. I get so frustrated and angry about having to prepare my kids for something that they're not responsible for.
There's this unspoken code of racism and white supremacy that says that my life does not matter.
You could put your hands up and say and cooperate and say that I'm choking and still be killed, and then there's no repercussions.
The conversation with him was really just, look, you're a beautiful young boy.
Being an African American is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful blessing. You have come from great people, but it's also a hard thing.
In America, because of your skin color, as a black boy and as a black man, we are going to be dealing with a lot of danger.
Under no circumstance are you to talk to the police if you're arrested until I get there.
Do what they say. Don't get into any arguments.
Make sure your hands are out of your pockets so they can see.
These are the questions you can ask. This is who to call. This is what happens if this bad thing. It's not like, please, master, don't whip me. No, it's like, excuse me, sir, what is your badge number? I'm going to film this.
If you want police brutality to stop, if you want police to treat you like a human being, then you have to see yourself as a human being.
You have every right in this world that anyone else does.
What are your, thoughts in terms of, like, say, reality TV shows like Cops and what was the other one? Whatever. But, like, Cops is probably one of the most common and well-known reality TV police shows. How is the portrayal in the show compared to the actual job?
If you watch an episode of Cops, you are watching about a half an hour of interesting things that are happening. The cops crew typically rides with the same guy for like a week. So it takes them about a week to get enough interesting things to put on the show. A lot of police work is boring. For all the horrible things that happen, for all the abuses, and for all the stuff that we talk about, the thin blue line between order and chaos. A lot of police work is extremely boring. It's driving around, nothing happening, taking dumb reports about, I stole my bike, that nobody can investigate. So I think the problem with police reality television is that I think it really primes the public to think that there's just all this crazy shit happening out in the world, and that, well, thank God we have the cops to deal with that, when it just isn't like that. Like, there's just not that much madness happening out in the world, and
crimes are committed and solved in just before a commercial break kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, CSI was horrible. The CSI effect on juries is absolutely horrible because, juries think like, oh, there's just all this evidence, and the police, they have to really get a good case to bring it before the court. And it's just not true. There's just, there's not going to be a lot of evidence in most cases. And even if there was, like, nobody's getting a DNA sample for a petty theft, it's just the public has a really skewed view of crime and how crimes happen and why crimes happen. And the cops crew is all, it's very pro-police because they have to maintain these good relationships. So they're cutting out anything that would make the cops look bad for the most part. They're cutting out the times that police officers are mean or rude, not listening. They're cutting out things that would make you feel compassion for the suspect or the person being arrested a lot of times. So I don't think it's been a good for society.
It's strange because both in the propaganda that is out there, like your fictional shows and your reality shows like Cops, and in sort of the attitudes you describe being passed forward, like you guys being taught that you have to show dominance and you have to be vigilant or they're going to get you, like, both of them sort of fill the same self-fulfilling prophecy and the same propaganda message to the public that the police are this bulwark that will hold the line against the horrors of this world to protect the, innocent little citizens on the inside. It all seems to drive towards building that point when crime and violent crime has been dropping over time all over the world. Like, it's becoming less and less of a problem as time goes on, but it seems the propaganda wants you to believe that the exact opposite of that.
I mean, the police have a vested interest in making it sound like there's just these warring, Mad Max factions out there. And there are certain cities and certain parts of cities that, yeah, they do have some challenges like that. But I mean, most murders, happen among family members for family reasons. Most, sexual assaults happen, in a family or somebody, it's not rapists in the bushes jumping out. I mean, that's not the most common way that happens. But I get comments on my anti-cop videos sometimes. It's like, oh, well, if we get rid of the police, it's going to be mayhem and blood in the streets. And I'm just like, it really isn't. I mean, it really is not in most places. It's just not how crime happens, and most economic crimes have economic causes. If we got rid of the police, we could use that money to solve those economic causes. And I think you'd be surprised at how much better off we'd be.
Mm-hmm. In your experience, are cops encouraged to lie to citizens in the public?
100%. There's two different kinds of, there's a lot of different kinds, but I think there's two different kinds of lying that people should think about when police are working. There's lying on police reports and lying on an official record. We are not encouraged to do that per se. But in terms of just lying to people to make things easier for us, we are definitely encouraged to do that. And in fact, we are protected in the United States. We are protected by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has ruled that police officers have a legal right to lie, to make things up, to mislead the public, for basically any reason. Yeah, we lie all the time to the public. I would, if a police officer is telling you something, I would never trust them. If they're telling you the sky is blue, I would double check. And it's things like we lie to get people to just do things that we want to do. Like, I'll tell people certain things are against the law that weren't against the law just because I want them to move along. It's things that are benign like that, to telling people that, oh, well, your partner already confessed, so you might as well confess to get your side of the story out. Otherwise, you're going to jail. We lie about stuff like that. I used to park in the fire lane when I would go get food in my police car. I remember people coming out going, "Hey, officer, you're parked illegally," and I would tell them, "No, the state of California Supreme Court says that I have a legal right to park here." That's not true. I just made that up. I just don't want to talk to the guy anymore. So yeah, we lie to the public all the time.
And is that ubiquitous enough that like a cop standing nearby or your partner, would they bat an eye at you just making some shit up?
One of the most talented improv groups I've ever worked with is law enforcement. We are we are trained to yes and each other to a degree that you would find almost magical and inspiring if it wasn't used for evil so often.
Do police officers lie to people to the point of entrapment, where like you're getting false confessions out of people, or where you're like coercing people to commit crimes so you can arrest them?
I know some guys do that, do the entrapment thing. It's not as common. That wasn't as common in my experience, or at least people didn't do it around me very much. But a lot of people don't understand, going back to juries and, juries having the wrong idea. If you're smart enough, you can trick people into confessing to almost anything. And I think people don't really understand that being intimidated by a police officer has made people admit to things that they never did because they just wanted the interaction to end. And so officers definitely do take advantage of that. That was one of the Supreme Court cases that says that we have the legal right to lie. Is somebody's, I forget what the case was, but it was an officer said, "Hey, we have your DNA all over this thing. You might as well tell us what really happened." They didn't have the DNA, and they just made it up. But yeah, you can lie and tell people you have evidence that you don't have, all kinds of stuff.
It would put that innocent person into a weird spot because say you're being lied to and the cop says, "Yeah, we have your fingerprints on the dead body," or whatever. Like, you might make that calculation in your head, saying like, "Well, even though I'm innocent, apparently they got me, so I may as well take the plea bargain instead of going to jury and getting the death penalty or life in prison. So like maybe I can take this 10-year plea bargain and I'll be done with it." Like, I can see how that lie would cause an innocent person to make that calculation in their head. Well, the cop says maybe I can get out and have a normal life if I only spend 10 years in prison, so I may as well take that plea bargain and plead to the crime right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's happened 1,000 times, and it's double bad because if a police officer gets fixated on you as a suspect, if a detective gets fixated on you and thinks you're the suspect and you're the one that did it, and they weasel a confession out of you, typically the police stop looking into the case because you've confessed, and a confession is good as gold in court. A lot of people think like, "Oh, well, I'll just say yes to get out of the interview, and then I'll be exonerated in court." Well, not if they don't keep looking, not if they don't look for any other evidence. If they just use your confession as the only piece of evidence, you're hosed. And now you're having to fight uphill to get them to reinvestigate a case that, as far as they're concerned, they've already solved. That's happened many, many times.
Why would anyone confess to a crime they did not commit? It happens so often in Chicago. Defense attorneys call the city the false confession capital of the United States. 2 cases we examined involved several teenage boys who were arrested and, they say, forced or tricked into confessing to violent crimes they never committed.
We all of us got one thing in common. We did an extensive amount of time in jail for something we didn't do, and that's the bottom line.
All were found guilty based solely on confessions. Did anyone ask you, Terrell Swift, did you murder this woman?
That was the first thing they said. Whoa, raped and beat who? Nina, I don't know Nina Glover. Can I get my mother in here so I can get a lawyer? And nothing.
Terrell voluntarily turned himself in to police and was placed in an interrogation room surrounded by several detectives. The questioning, he said, lasted for over 12 hours. How close were they? Show me physically how close were they.
Like right here, you're gonna die in jail, you're never going home.
Mm-hmm. Yelling at you?
Yelling at me.
Were you scared? Did you cry?
Absolutely. I was crying, but no one listened.
Terrell wanted to go home and says police told him if he admitted to the rape and murder, he could leave. So he signed a 21-page confession which gave specific details to how he and his co-defendants committed the crime. Now, I gotta tell you, the first time I read it, all 21 pages, I said, that man is guilty.
Right. Everything that's in that confession was fed to us, myself and my co-defendants, by the police.
Did they force you to sign?
No.
So why'd you sign it?
I thought I was going home.
I mean, you were 17 years old, so you weren't a child.
I guess I was still a mama's boy.
Come on now, you had to know if you admitted to raping and killing a woman, you weren't going home to mama.
I had no understanding of that. None.
Terrell Swift would later recant, but it was too late. At trial, a judge believed the confession and sentenced him to 30 years.
That whole ordeal, it done something to every last one of us. And with me, it made me numb.
I'm going to ask you some hypotheticals. Like, you may not have any direct experience with this kind of stuff, but you worked with cops. You knew a lot of cops. I sort of want to see what your opinion is of how these cops justify these actions to themselves. So, why do you think a cop would decide to plant evidence on someone, and how do they justify it?
There's a couple different scenarios in which that typically happens. I would just like to say, for the record, believe it or not, never planted anything on anybody. That wasn't my style. I didn't like to work that way. For me, law enforcement was like a puzzle. I wanted to figure out how to get you legit. Didn't like to take that kind of shortcut. That makes me a different kind of asshole. But I knew guys that had a reputation for doing that, and a big part of it was our gang unit had a reputation for things showing up in people's pockets that they seemed surprised to find in those pockets. And a lot of it was, hey, these gangsters are dangerous. They are up to no good. And if I can't catch them in the act, I can at least waste their time for the weekend. Hook them up for a little bit of a little baggie of crack or a pipe or something. I can waste their time for the weekend and prevent them from committing crimes over the weekend. So they're already a gangster. They're already a bad guy. Who cares if they don't? So what if it's not this crime? It'll be a different one. I'm saving a life. They can't go on a shooting tonight, or I'm saving somebody from getting robbed at gunpoint by hooking these guys up for this other thing. So I think that's typically the justification is like, well, this is a bad person. I'm going to get them this way to prevent them from doing something else bad, is kind of the self-justification.
Sort of like, for the greater good, I know this person is bad being free, so I'm going to find a reason to arrest them, kind of thing. And they just manufacture one?
Yeah, exactly. Or the other thing that our gang unit was, rumored to be doing was, you would plant something on somebody to get leverage over them. They might find a low-level gangster, some 16-year-old, some initiate, put a pipe on him and then take it out and go, oh, we got you. But tell you what, I'll lose this pipe if you tell me who was involved in that robbery last week. And, use that to trick people into either confessing to a better crime or incriminating somebody else or being an informant. There was a lot of quid pro quo, hey, I'll forget I found this on you if you let me know the next time, Lil Smokey's out in a stolen car or something like that. Was a big reason to do stuff like that.
Why would a cop decide to lie on a report? I guess color what happened. Like, how do they justify knowing what actually happened, but just lying on the report?
Some officers make an arrest before they've figured out what the arrest was for. There's a very serious crime in the United States. It's a super felony, and it's called contempt of cop. And if you commit contempt of cop, you may find yourself in handcuffs while the officers try to figure out what you did. And so I know there have been arrests for contempt of cop that needed to be sort of backfilled with elements of crimes. A fairly standard reason that might happen.
What's up, man? Hey, it's cool. It's cool. You can record me because I'm recording you too. All right. Next time I wave at you, man, you can wave with all your hands, man, all your fingers instead of just your middle finger.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, that one.
That's freedom of speech, dude.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you continue, man, and you want to act like this, I'll just take you to jail for disorderly conduct, persistent disorderly conduct.
I believe this.
So continue to walk and don't say a word. Don't say a word. I'm going to take you to jail if you continue. Continue walking.
You want another civil suit on your hands, motherfucker? You better
continue walking.
You want your sergeant down here right now.
Continue walking.
Call your sergeant.
Continue walking.
Call your motherfucking sergeant.
4200, send me another unit down there.
Sit here and my kid and my fucking wife, and you're just gonna sit here and harass me like this.
I waved at you. I simply waved at you.
One more time. And I went like this.
I'm at Clan West.
Couldn't even hold my hand up.
Look, All I did was I waved at you as a nice gesture to you and your wife as you were walking. Okay? And then you turn around and flip me off.
Your point?
Okay? So I stopped to ask you what your problem is.
Is that a crime?
It's disorderly conduct.
It is not.
It is.
Did I offend you in some
there's
way?
other people walking around. Look at these people, these kids.
These kids that are seeing you yell at me?
Yeah, because I simply stopped. No, you're not free to leave. You're not free to go. You're gonna stay right here. As a matter of fact, will you take the dog, please?
No.
Will you take the dog?
I'm not sure. He didn't read you out with anybody.
Come on with the disturbance. Okay.
Are you serious, dude?
Yep. Go ahead. You're not under arrest. You're being detained because you're acting hostile towards me.
Here,
You want another unit down here, so I'm going to send you another unit. My chief's actually going to come down here.
You know my lawyer will be being called right after this.
Okay.
My family attorney.
All right. You're not under arrest. Okay?
I am being detained.
You are being detained.
That means I am under arrest.
No, you're not.
I asked the crime I committed.
There's two different things. Okay.
That's the crime I committed.
Come on over here.
Don't touch me, sir, please.
Okay, well.
You say I'm not under arrest?
You're detained.
Hey, this dude's illegally arresting me right now.
You're not under arrest.
Walking with my kid.
You're not under arrest.
Walking with my dog, and he is arresting me.
No.
Because I was walking with my dog.
You're not under arrest, man.
Swear to God, I have nothing on me or nothing.
You're not under arrest.
I'm really getting put in the back of your car,
Fortunately, I got one detained.
Some things in law enforcement happen very quickly. You may be interacting with somebody and then they just run. They start running. It's happened to me several times where I would just be chatting with somebody and on a dime they're running, and then I'm chasing, and I don't even know why I'm chasing him because I don't even know why he's running. And so there are officers who get caught up in the moment of something and beat the shit out of somebody, and then they go, "Uh-oh, I beat this guy up. I better have a good reason for it." And so they make sure that there's a good reason in the report. I knew an officer who got fired because he was copy pasting his DUI reports because he didn't want to write them. Never underestimate the laziness of police officers. So he was just copy pasting reports, and some DA or some defense attorney was like, "Hey, this seems familiar." I think he forgot to change a name. Instead of changing it to Ramirez, it was Martinez, and the defense attorney figured it out. The guy got fired. Because that's lying on a report, so sometimes it's laziness.
I observed insert name here, swerving in and out of lane at insert time here, blah, 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 like that kind of shit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just like some template, that they didn't fix the template or whatever. So, sometimes it's just sheer laziness that, they didn't take good notes or whatever, and there's another kind of lie too, I think, that happens where you are encouraged to remember things the way that they should have happened. And so I think there are a lot of police officers who, because the other issue is that you have this big dynamic thing that happens on the job, and then you might not get the chance to write that report until 5 hours later. When it's 2 a.m, you finally grab a cup of coffee, you're parked under a tree somewhere, writing this story, or you're writing this report of what had happened. So you could be hours away from when it happened, and you have told yourself the pristine version of that event in your head several times before you've actually had the chance to sit down and write it. So I think a lot of times too, officers are remembering things the way that they should have happened, not the way that they did happen.
The big thing that's in the news right now, I think it'll probably still be in the news cycle when this episode comes out, but Uvalde.
Well, Tony, what we're getting is a fuller picture of the chaos, of that excruciating weight. But what we may never understand is having an understanding of why it took nearly 400 officers from at least 7 different law enforcement agencies 73 minutes to take down the shooter.
Oh, shots fired! Get inside! Go! Take cover, guys. Am I bleeding? Am I bleeding?
New body cam footage released by the Uvalde mayor shows the first moments officers arrived at Robb Elementary School.
That's my wife's classroom. He's already in the classroom. I got me, right?
About 4 minutes after the shooter entered rooms 111 and 112, one officer is grazed. School police officer Ruben Ruiz was heard in the background, recognizing his wife's classroom.
Dude, we gotta get in there. We gotta get in there. He just keeps shooting.
But seconds later, confusion and misinformation. In a different body cam video from another officer who heads outside to take cover and alert dispatch, he seems to believe the suspect is inside an office.
He's contained. We got multiple officers inside the building at this time. He believe he's barricaded in one of the offices. Messed up, is still shooting.
Shortly after, the urgency fades and officers are seen waiting and waiting.
What are we doing
looking
here?
for guidance.
What are we doing here?
Some begin to break windows and pull students out of the building.
Yeah, go, 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 go.
By now, we see the first images of the school district's chief of police, Pete Arredondo.
Sir, if you can hear me, please put your firearm down, sir. We don't want anybody else hurt.
Arredondo and other officers try to negotiate with the suspect.
Let me know if there's any kids in there or anything. This could be peaceful.
We hear police dispatch alert officers that a child is calling 911 from inside a classroom.
You have a child on the line.
Hey, what was that?
He is in a room full of victims.
Close to 5 minutes later, Arredondo is seen heading towards a classroom, not where the shooter was, to test keys and appears unable to open it. More minutes tick by with little action appearing to be taken by the officers inside the school, besides trying to talk to the suspect.
Please put your gun down, sir. Please don't hurt anyone else.
And more keys to open the door that we've come to learn was likely already unlocked.
We're testing keys.
There were multiple systemic failures.
On Sunday, a Texas committee found that the chaotic scene was caused by a lack of leadership. The committee released a 77-page report which found that those first responders who went right towards the shooter's classroom within minutes acted appropriately at first. But all officers failed to prioritize saving the lives of innocent victims over their own safety.
What do you think, one, would prevent all those officers from acting? Like, even though they just previously got training for that exact scenario. And number two, like, what would cause them to circle the wagons and become so self-protective? Like, I've seen police do that in more arguable situations, but Uvalde just seems like a failure all around, but yet the police chief is just not cooperating. So, yeah, like, why would they fail to act, and why are they circling the wagon so hard? Like, what are they being told internally?
Yeah, the Uvalde thing kills me because, like, I worked for a rowdy police department. I worked for an agency that had a reputation for being cowboys and shitheads and assholes. You know, so like when I look back on my law enforcement career, I look back on me and a bunch of people that I worked with just being dicks and, you know, no honor. And yet none of us would have done that. You know what I mean? Like, that's below even what we were capable of. Like, I remember getting training. I specifically remember going out to the local high school on a weekend to train for an active shooter scenario exactly like that. And I remember being told by my sergeant, by my lieutenant, by anybody, by my training officers, if there's an active shooter after Columbine, we don't wait. You do not wait. So here's the ideal way to do it. Get 3 guys out here, stack up like this, and you go in. But if you're on the scene and you hear shooting and you're by yourself, you go in. That's why you get paid the big bucks. That's why you have the training. You're the big hero. It's time to be the big hero. Get in there and fix it. It was drilled into me my entire career that we don't wait in an active shooter in a school with kids. You just don't do it. And so when I saw Uvalde unfolding, I mean, my jaw dropped because it's just, of all the times to be an aggressive, gung-ho cowboy that shoots first and asks questions later, the one time we don't do it is when it's kids? Are you fucking kidding me? I was just, it's so shocking and so outside of what we were trained to do. And I think that, that should answer your questions why they're circling the wagons. Police officers are very, very, very well protected from arrest and from liability, civil liability, when they're following their training. So this was such an egregious violation of training that I would think every single officer on site at that incident should be liable for a lawsuit from everybody. But as to why it didn't happen, law enforcement culture revolves around officer safety. I mean, the mantra that was drilled into me was better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And so, meaning I'd rather take my chances in court than die. And so it was drilled into us that you make decisions based on what gets you home at the end of the night. But above anything else, you and your partner are going home at the end of the night, period. I mean, in a perverse and unfortunately ironic way, that's what an Uvalde cop would use to justify shooting an unarmed person is, well, I thought he had a gun. Well, I thought he was reaching for his waistband. I'm going home at the end of my shift. That same mentality is why they didn't go in and shoot the shooter in the school. And it's so perverse and so disgusting. But that officer safety mindset is what convinces cops, hey, I'm protecting myself. I'm going home at the end of my shift no matter what. I don't owe these people my life. I go home at the end of my shift. And so I think that's just what happened. There was some, whatever veteran officer, whatever leader was on site made that call, and nobody was going to go against that because that's the culture.
When you first started at the police academy, did you have any sense of foreshadowing that you would end up at the ass end of it being a police abolitionist?
No. I was a little fresh-faced conservative Christian who'd grown up in wealthy areas my whole life. I thought the police were there to help you, a very prestigious job. Like, oh wow, what's not to love about the police? And there were guys in my academy that got into it because they were bullies. There were guys in my academy that got into it because they were abusive and were attracted to the power. I genuinely did, and I genuinely thought I was going to go in and help people. I was going to save lives. I was going to protect people. Most of the people that I worked with, we really thought we were doing good. We really thought we were the thin blue line that was keeping people safe. We would go home proud. All these times that I've talked about, fucking with gangsters and hurting people and escalating, we thought that was keeping quote unquote normal people safe. We thought, well, to make the omelet of public safety, you got to break a few eggs, and so I really thought it was a prestigious job that was a little rough and a little rowdy, but at the end of the day, you've done good. And I had no inkling that I would come out of this years later and think, oh my God, I was the bad guy for almost 10 years of my life. Holy shit, I was part of a system that was abusive and toxic and disgusting and irredeemable. I had no idea. Poor little fresh-faced Phil coming out of Orange County had no clue what path he was about to take.
So I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it's been said in a number of times by a number of sources that the rates of police officers engaging in domestic violence is many times higher than that of the general public. Why is it that cops are beating their spouses?
Police work is like I've been describing, it encourages you to be aggressive. It encourages you to see disobedience as a threat. And so on the job, you are encouraged to interpret somebody not complying with you as somebody about to harm you. And so that's why you see officers lashing out, punching people, slapping people, kicking people, pushing them down, harming them when they don't really deserve it, because for whatever reason, their brain has been wired to see noncompliance as a threat. And I think a lot of officers do not know how to turn that off when they go home. And I think a lot of officers, like I mentioned, you spend so much time away from your family. You spend so much time out on the job, missing holidays, missing birthdays, missing family dinners. You start to lose connection with the people in your life. You start to lose that sense of intimacy with them. I knew so many officers that were just, dialing it back a little bit from assaulting their spouses, just cheating on their spouses. I knew so many, I would say, the vast majority of officers that I ever worked with had a side piece on duty. That was just part of the culture, is having, somebody to having a special friend. And so you are in this culture where your fellow officer is your real family. You're fucking somebody on the side. You go home and your nagging wife doesn't, hey, when are you going to take the kids to school? Hey, you're working Christmas again. When are you going to? And I think a lot of officers just lose connection with their family and see that person as just like any other citizen that they're willing to put hands on when they feel that that person is not sufficiently respecting them.
From what you said, it's drilled so heavily into you that you have to always be on alert or else you are going to get killed. It would make sense that it would be near impossible to turn that part of your brain off when you're at home. So any little thing could just, like the match.
I mean, a lot of my training, when I've talked to other people about it later, they're like, oh, bro, you have CPTSD. And I'm like, what? And so it's like, I know there's a ton of officers out here that are, in a very real sense, wounded. They have PTSD, CPTSD, but mental health culture is so stigmatized in law enforcement. Nobody is getting help. Nobody is being talked to and saying, hey, bro, you are sick right now. And so a lot of officers are self-medicating with drugs, with alcohol. And so in addition to all of that instinct to be aggressive with people, a lot of officers are fucking alcoholics at home. And so that exacerbates it too.
It was when I was 5 months pregnant and I wasn't allowed to see people, friends, even my parents. And I just sat crying my eyes out.
He sort of love bombed you at the beginning.
He did, yeah.
And then his behaviour changed.
It could range from, grabbing my hair and making me perform oral sex. He raped me and then said, right, you better get up and do me some breakfast. Hurt my dog, kicked him when he attacked him after I screamed.
Your sons had a name for your dog?
Yeah, they used to call him my rape alarm.
For nearly 20 years, Stacey felt trapped in an abusive relationship. But to the outside world, her husband was a respected police officer. Tonight, we can reveal that Stacey is one of over 100 women who have contacted the Centre for Women's Justice, claiming their police officer partners had abused them.
All the women we've spoken to claim that their allegations have not been taken seriously by detectives. Now, there seems to be a distinct theme in all of these women's stories. Domestic abuse carried out by police officers leaves the partners feeling doubly powerless. They have the helplessness that many victims of domestic abuse already feel, but that's compounded by the fact that their police officer partner, their abuser, is part of a system which is supposed to protect them.
He was physically violent to our children. Our son has scars on him. He was 8 at the time, pulled him off of his metal bunk bed onto his drum kit and it pierced his side. He would literally explode at them and they used to run into their bedrooms and shut the door. The youngest son used to barricade his door. The oldest one used to have his window open so he could run out the window if he come and got him. We left because he threatened to slit my throat and watch me choke on my blood as I sleep.
Not long after, Stacey reported the rape, domestic abuse of her and her children to the police force where her partner used to be based, in the Child Protection Unit.
They were all of his mates. He was in there for 15 years, so how are you supposed to have an objective view to a bloke that everyone knows?
And in 2019, she is told the case against her ex-husband is being dropped.
To them, it's case closed. He is able to go and be a predator on somebody else. And he is a predator.
We contacted the police force in question, who confirmed her ex-partner, who denies all the allegations, was interviewed, but there was insufficient evidence to proceed, and that details were shared with safeguarding agencies. Of the nearly 130 cases, not one woman feels they've got justice.
What was the last straw? What were the steps that led you to quit becoming a police officer, to quit the force and lead you into abolition?
Yeah, I mean, the sad part of my story, people are always very nice and complimentary. Oh, good for you. You finally saw the light and you got out of there. I didn't see the light and get out of there. I wanted to move out of state. And so I quit in good standing to move to Minnesota. I had a long distance relationship and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get out of California, move to Minnesota, have a little adventure. So I quit, moved to Minnesota, and I couldn't get a cop job out there because I didn't have a degree yet. I ended up outside of law enforcement against my will, but I was still very pro-cop at the time. I was still trying to get hired at Minnesota agencies. I was trying to get hired at the TSA. It wasn't until I would say 5-6 years after I had left law enforcement, that I really started to, see stuff like Eric Garner, the guy that was choked to death by NYPD, Tamir Rice, a little kid that was shot to death, and then George Floyd. It was really the George Floyd protests, well, the George Floyd incident, and then the ensuing protests where, I remember times, the George Floyd incident, the cop had his knee on the neck of this guy who was unarmed, and the guy died. I remembered so many times doing that move to people, having my knee on their neck for a minute, for 2 minutes, and it was fine. And then hearing this guy did it for 9 minutes, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, you couldn't think of anything else to do. You just sat on this dude for 9 minutes. It was so egregious. And then in the protests, I was like, yeah, the protests are completely justified. Fuck that cop. He should lose his job. And then I watched all of these agencies all over the United States, from California to New York to Texas to Kentucky to Washington. I watched these agencies beat the shit out of protesters, beat the shit out of the media, beat the shit out of anybody. And I was just like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. This is unreformable. This is unrepairable. Like, you can't even hold these guys accountable for obvious stuff. They'll beat the shit out of you for holding them accountable, for filming them. And so I was just really torn up about it during those protests. And that's how I started Googling around. Like, that was when I decided to do my first video about police and about how the police taught me to dehumanize people. I want you to understand what's happening in their heads. They have ceased to see some people, mainly black people, as humans worthy of dignity and respect. They see themselves as separate and above the public, and they believe that the only way to keep order and to prevent the city from turning into, is to violently punish people, to convince the rest of us that deviation from social control will be painful and maybe deadly. I mean, you see it in the way that police across the country are torturing protesters and shooting chemical weapons at members of the press indiscriminately. Remember, the protests are about police brutality, and the only response from law enforcement is to up the brutality. Why would they do this unless they have completely dehumanized the public, and that they believe that only fear and pain will dissipate civil unrest? Am I saying that every individual cop is privately waging a racist crusade against black people, and that they harbor a deep festering hatred in their heart of hearts? No, I'm not saying that. You know that I'm not interested in individual actions. I'm interested in the ways that structures and systems and unjust hierarchies harm people. So it's irrelevant to me what's in this or that cop's heart, because the system encourages cops to dehumanize people. The system protects cops who do it, and polite white society applauds them for keeping a boot on the neck of, So why am I telling you this? Because I think you need to know this when you read stories of police violence and watch footage of the protests. I think you need to know this so that you don't dehumanize your fellow human. I don't want you to say, they're just thugs, fuck them, and avert your gaze when your fellow human is tortured by the state. Many of the people murdered by police are in some kind of crisis. Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's desperation born from poverty, maybe it's a mental health episode. I'm telling you that the majority of people killed by police deserve help, not death. And if you believe me when I say that, I want you to ask yourself this: are you sure you'll never need help one day? And so I wanted to give context, like, this is why this is happening. This is why a cop could do this to a George Floyd. And this is why a cop could beat the shit out of a journalist filming the protest for George Floyd, because they've completely dehumanized the public. And here's how it happened. Here's my story. And it was through researching that video and researching alternatives that I got turned on to Angela Y. Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore and criticalresistance.org and all these different places and people that were writing about this. And it really just started to dawn on me the gravity of what I had been in and the machinery that I'd been a part of. But yeah, it really wasn't until years after I was out of the cult that I could look back on it and go, holy shit, that was a cult. And oh my God, like it was really bad. And it's even worse now. I mean, it is, for as bad as it was when I was a cop, it is 10 times worse now. It is not getting better. It is getting worse.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's powerful hearing you say like things like that like so plainly that it is a cult that encourages them to dehumanize the public. Like those aren't light words. Those are like powerful accusations, and it's stuff that I've suspected kind of watching the hundreds of clips that happened and emerged from those protests. Just hundreds of clips of cops abusing people for no good reason. Like I think there was an old man that got pushed over, and I forget what happened. He was either paralyzed or died or something like that. And I don't think any justice was ever had. And all he did was get in the way of these advancing cops, and he got pushed over.
Oh, it's even worse than that. It happened in Buffalo, and if I recall correctly, one of the officers had dropped something. He was walking up to hand them back something that an officer had dropped. They pushed him over and he smashed the back of his head on the concrete, and they just left him there to bleed. He didn't die, but he was in the hospital for a while. And yes, the whoever was investigating that case, the state attorney general or whatever said, nope, that was totally valid. And that's just what I'm talking about. Like of all the egregious things, and the people that are supposed to be holding cops accountable were like, yep, looks good to me.
Chief Ramsey, let me just start with you and your reaction to these 57 officers resigning from the emergency response team in support of those 2 officers who pushed the 75-year-old man onto the ground and then lied about it.
Well, if they want to resign, they should resign from the department. They don't have a vote in what unit that they're in. If I were running that department, they would not be allowed to step down from those positions. If they want to resign from the police department, let them go, and I would not bring them back. It just means you got some slots you have to fill. I mean, that kind of stuff is ridiculous, and I can't be tolerated.
Initially, the police statement in Buffalo said that a person, that 75-year-old man we saw pushed, the official statement said that he tripped and fell. And that's not what happened. I mean, we all saw it. And then in Washington, D.C., U.S. Park Police originally said no tear gas was used to move protesters before President Trump walked across Lafayette Square Park. But again, that's not true. We saw it. We saw the tear gas. How do these statements, coupled with all this, I mean, how does this cultivate trust in the police?
It doesn't. That's part of the problem. I mean, you could go back to Laquan McDonald and the statements that officers made there that just simply were not true. Anyone who looked at the video of that 75-year-old man being pushed down and being injured and says that's okay and I'm going to resign over it, you don't need him on the police force, quite frankly. And what was even worse than that, because maybe if they gave him a shove, which was inappropriate, it may not have intended for him to fall. But how do you walk by a person laying on the sidewalk with blood pooling around their head, and somehow that's okay? That officer should get a pat on the back and go back to work? No, it doesn't work that way. That's why there are protests in the street right now, because those kinds of actions on the part of police. That's exactly why we're where we are right now. It's an embarrassment, quite frankly.
As an American cop, did you ever look to places like Canada and Britain and Europe where they were doing policing a different way, like in cases, unarmed officers? Did you ever look at them and wonder, like, why are they doing things differently, or why are they having, better outcomes with the public, and why are they having, lower rates of crime? Or did you just sort of look at them and think, like, they're crazy for being unarmed?
Yeah, I remember during my law enforcement career, I went to the UK for 10 days, and I remember walking around London and seeing some of the cops. The cops either had submachine guns or they were unarmed. I remember thinking that was very strange, but I remember thinking like, you couldn't pay me to work unarmed. Like, there's no way. And you hear about Japan, a lot of the officers work unarmed. And honestly, as an American cop, as an American first, I just assumed every other country's fucked up and is doing it wrong. And as an American cop, I just thought, y'all are crazy. Like, There's no way you would never convince me to do that. We're a sitting duck. Yeah, I never did think to ask why you had so many fewer school shootings, why you had so many fewer, incidents of violence like this. That didn't occur to me. But it sure did occur to me that y'all look silly out there unarmed and couldn't believe it and what a bunch of pussies. And I mean, that's just the mentality, is that America is number one. We're the best. We're the toughest. And too bad for you if you're not like us.
Yeah, and you guys are like not quite the best. I think you're about 32nd.
Yeah, I mean, we're the best at incarcerating our own people. We're the best at medical bankruptcy, but we're dog shit in maternal mortality, dog shit in infant mortality. But the ones that count, throwing people in jail, we're number one, baby.
Well, it's all those for-profit prisons, right? Someone's got to bang out the license plates.
The free market, the invisible hand.
Oh yeah, that's a future episode we need to get into as well. The prison industrial complex, feeding that machine. Holy fuck.
That was my most recent video. If you would take a look at my most recent videos on prison slavery. Slavery was not abolished. It was protected.
Yes, slavery is still illegal. Once again, I think we're getting to the end of the time we have you, so just let me talk up your shit. I found you on YouTube and then went to Twitter to see if you wanted to come on for this, but binge that dang dad's shit. Type in that dang dad into YouTube, binge all his videos. He has the most recent one, Slavery is Still Illegal, banger video. The rap album that changed my mind about law enforcement, banger. How Being a Cop Broke My Brain, banger. Binge the videos, they're great.
Yeah, I agree. I also enjoy talking about non-cop things too. I have diverse interests, but so I like to mix it up every now and again. But yeah, I mean, I think it's something that every time I want to make a video about fucking Elden Ring or something, I'm like, well, gosh, the world sure is shit. I sure would wish I could help and do more. And so I feel people ask me, well, what are you doing to fix what you've done? Have you ever gone back and made reparations? And it's like, I don't even know if I could find the people that I'd harmed in the past. I don't have access to those records. So, this is what I'm trying to do to make the world a better place. This is my meager, contribution to try to set right what I've set wrong. So, check out the videos, share them with people that you think might be convinced by it. I like to think I'm a pretty gentle communicator. I try to communicate with respect and gentleness. So if you have family members that might be turned off by more hardline content, I'm a pretty easy entry into police and prison abolition.
Well, thank you so very, very much for coming on the show. I think I speak for all of us when I say this has been our most enlightening episode in ages.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, really appreciate your participation.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me. Oh, and I should say to lend your podcast some credibility to your listeners, I have spoken on many podcasts and many Twitch streams and many people's live streams and YouTube channels. I've done interviews. You are the only outfit to try to verify that I was actually a cop.
Oh, really?
You're the only people that checked up on that and asked if they could see some proof. So
citation needed.
Yeah, you all definitely should. Your audience should know you are very credible. You did your due diligence on that one.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I will catch you all later.
Yeah, you have a good night, man.
You too.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yeah,
that was really good. I like that.
All right, we have to do the podcast thing.
It's not just a fun conversation.
Oh yeah, I forgot what we were doing for a sec. Alrighty, so I think that the GAT conversation speaks for itself, and I am tired of talking. So, for Occultae Veritatis podcast, I am Ood Gallifrey.
It's very
Leon Felger. Oh, fuck you, Richard.
Off. Come
Leon
on.
Felger. Leon Felger.
Leon Felger.
Nailed it.
Richard Bigley.
I'm Phil, aka Dang Dad. I didn't leave early because the host didn't tell me that I had to stay. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. Have a wonderful day.
All right, goodbye.
Love you, bye.
A very quiet palate cleanser introduction for you today. This is Moonflower Way by Brenda Moonflower. Enjoy and catch Leon in the after show.
Do not fear when your path's unclear, unsure of the way you should go. The road less traveled may be unknown, but if you're still, you'll never grow. Come and join me deep in the forest, neath the pale moon, where there's magic for our amusement to chase away the gloom. Careful roaming neath the trees, for soon you'll hear the call. A mystical enchantment is on the breeze once the night falls. Come and join me deep in the forest, neath the pale moon, where there's magic for our amusement to chase away the gloom, to chase away the gloom. Far within the starry sky, a path appears before you. Dance with me neath the calm moonlight, I'll be waiting for you. Come and join me deep in the forest, neath the pale moon, where there's magic for our amusement to chase away the gloom. Oh, please come join me soon.
Hello, occultists, and welcome to the after show. My name is Leon Filger. I've got a piece of news for you. The following recording session later on next month, I will not be presenting an episode, and the reason for that is that I have been scheduled for 12 electroconvulsive therapy treatments. I've been on the wait list for these for almost a year, so I'm very happy they're finally coming around. Flashback to our episode on electroconvulsive therapy if you'd like to learn more about it. Basically, I have to show up at the hospital at 6 o'clock in the morning. They start an IV, they inject me with some drugs, they put me to sleep, and then they electrocute my brain. And hopefully when I wake up, I don't feel quite so shitty. We're doing 12 treatments over the course of a little more than a month. So for the next couple of recording sessions, I will not be contributing anything because my brain will be mush. But after that, I'll be recovered and we'll be back to the good old times with the after show. Good night.